"We need this room back," my daughter-in-law said calmly, the yellow tape measure snapping against the wall as if she were planning a renovation show, not standing in the bedroom where her father-in-law had taken his last breath. I didn't say anything. I didn't ask her what she meant. I didn't remind her that my husband had died only 3 weeks earlier, or that this room had been mine for over 40 years. I simply stood there, my hands folded in front of me, watching her mark measurements in a small notebook. "I'm glad you're here. Stay with my story until the end, and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. It helps me remember that I'm not as alone as I sometimes feel." The house felt different after my husband passed. Not quieter, just unfamiliar. The same walls, the same hardwood floors we'd refinished together decades ago, but the air no longer held his presence. His slippers were still by the bed. His reading glasses still sat on the nightstand. I hadn't moved them. I wasn't ready. My daughter-in-law, Claire, walked in and out of the room with purpose. She didn't look at the bed. She didn't pause at the framed wedding photo on the dresser. She focused on the walls, the windows, the square footage. Like the room itself mattered more than the life that had been lived inside it. My son stood in the hallway pretending to scroll through his phone. He didn't meet my eyes. He hadn't, not since the funeral. "This room gets the best light," Claire continued, more to herself than to me. "It would be perfect for a nursery or an office." I nodded once, out of habit. I had spent most of my life nodding to keep the peace. The night before, I had slept sitting up on that same bed, wrapped in my husband's old flannel shirt because it still smelled faintly like him. I remembered how he used to reach for my hand in the dark just to make sure I was there. Now, strangers were deciding how much space I was allowed to take. After she left the room, I sat down on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped where my husband used to sleep. I pressed my palm there, feeling the indentation, feeling the absence. No tears came. They hadn't. Not yet. Grief had settled into me like a weight, steady and unmoving. This house wasn't large by today's standards, just under 1,800 square feet, but every inch held memory. The dent in the hallway wall from when my son learned to ride a bike indoors during a rainy winter, the kitchen drawer that stuck unless you lifted it just right, the bedroom window we used to open every spring no matter how chilly because my husband loved fresh air. I wondered when I stopped being a person in this home and started becoming an obstacle. That evening I made dinner as usual. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans. Claire ate quickly, already talking about contractors and paint colours. My son nodded along. No one asked if I'd eaten. No one asked how I was sleeping. I cleared the plates slowly, rinsing each one by hand, listening to their voices blur together behind me. I realised then that the room wasn't the first thing they'd taken back. It was my place. My time. My right to grieve at my own pace. I dried my hands on a dish towel and looked out the kitchen window into the dark backyard my husband used to tend every weekend. The grass needed cutting, the roses needed pruning, things I would now have to manage alone. That night, lying in bed, I made a quiet decision. I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't explain my pain to people who measured walls instead of reading faces. I would listen, I would remember, and I would wait. The morning after that conversation, I woke before sunrise. The house was still, the kind of stillness that presses against your ears. For a moment, I reached across the bed out of habit, my hand brushing only cool sheets. That small, familiar disappointment settled in my chest, steady and quiet. I sat up slowly and listened. No footsteps, no voices, just the low hum of the refrigerator downstairs and the faint ticking of the old wall clock in the hallway. My husband had insisted on keeping that clock, even when it started running 5 minutes fast. "It keeps us alert," he used to joke. I made my way to the kitchen, careful on the stairs. The wood creaked in the same places it always had. I brewed a pot of coffee, filling the mug he used to favour, even though I knew I wouldn't finish it. The smell lingered, warm and familiar, and for a brief second it felt like nothing had changed. But things had changed, subtly, quietly, like a line being erased and redrawn without asking permission. The dining table was still set from the night before. My plate sat untouched where I had left it. Claire's chair was pushed back, careless. My son's napkin lay folded beside his plate, unused. I cleared everything without rushing. I had nowhere else to be. After breakfast, I walked through the house, room by room, not searching, just noticing. The guest bathroom now held Claire's extra towels. The coat closet had been reorganised, my winter coat pushed to the side to make room for boxes labelled in neat handwriting. Office supplies, baby items. I paused there longer than I meant to. Upstairs, the bedroom door stood open. The tape measure lay on the dresser, coiled neatly, as if it belonged there. I picked it up, feeling its weight in my hand, and placed it inside the drawer instead. A small act, one no one would notice. In the late afternoon, I heard them come home. Laughter drifted up from the front hall. Claire's voice was light, animated, talking about paint samples and timelines. My son followed her up the stairs, carrying a stack of folders. They stopped outside the bedroom door, speaking in low tones. "We'll need to start soon," Claire said. "No sense waiting too long." My son agreed. He always did. They didn't come in. They didn't ask where I was. They assumed perhaps that I would adjust on my own. I stayed seated on the bed, hands folded in my lap, staring at the sunlight creeping across the floor. I thought of all the mornings I had woken up early to make breakfast for that same son, all the evenings I stayed up waiting for him to come home safely. That night I took out a small box from the back of my closet. Inside were old papers I hadn't touched in years, deeds, insurance statements, letters written in my husband's careful handwriting. I didn't read them yet. I simply placed the box beneath the bed and slid it into the shadows. At dinner, Claire talked about efficiency, about space, about how things needed to make sense going forward. My son nodded, chewing thoughtfully. I listened. I learned which words they used when they thought I wasn't paying attention. Afterward, I washed the dishes alone. The water ran hot over my hands. I watched the steam rise and fade, again and again. When I turned off the kitchen light and climbed the stairs, I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. This wasn't about a room. It was about erasing what came before, about rearranging the house so it fit their future, even if that future no longer included me. I closed the bedroom door gently behind me and sat on the edge of the bed. I didn't cry. I didn't confront anyone. I simply began to count the days. By the third day, patterns began to form. Not loud ones, quiet habits that repeated themselves without discussion. Claire started opening windows in rooms she planned to change. She left them cracked even when the mornings were cold. "Fresh air," she said once, not looking at me. The bedroom window stayed closed. That room was already decided. My son moved his things closer to the front of the house. Shoes by the door, jackets on the hall rack. He no longer used the closet upstairs. Small shifts, like furniture being nudged an inch at a time until it belonged to someone else. I kept my routine. I woke early. I made coffee. I watered the plants my husband used to care for. I folded laundry and placed it neatly in the drawers that were still mine. No one commented. No one asked how long I planned to stay. On Wednesday afternoon, a man I didn't recognise walked through the front door with Claire. He carried a clipboard and wore heavy work boots that left faint marks on the floor. "This is the contractor," she explained, as if she were introducing a neighbour. "He's just here to take a look." They went straight upstairs. I remained in the living room, seated in my husband's old chair. From there, I could hear their voices drifting down. Measurements, timelines, costs. The sound of the tape measure clicking open and closed again. The contractor asked a question. Claire answered. My son agreed. No one asked me. Later, when the man left, Claire placed a folder on the kitchen counter. It held brochures and estimates. She tapped it once with her finger. "We'll need to start clearing the room soon," she said, "just so we're all prepared." Prepared. That was the word she used. I nodded. Not because I agreed, but because I wanted to hear what came next. That evening, I found one of my dresser drawers slightly ajar. Inside, my things were shifted, folded differently, as if someone had searched without wanting to leave a trace. I closed the drawer and sat on the bed. My husband's side was untouched. They avoided that space, almost respectfully, or perhaps they simply didn't know what to do with it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, listening to the house settle, the soft pops and creaks of wood adjusting to the cool air. I thought about the early years when this house had been loud, toys on the floor, music playing, doors slamming. Back then, space had never been an issue. In the morning, I took a slow walk through the neighborhood. The sidewalks were familiar. I had pushed strollers down these streets, held my son's hand at every crosswalk. I greeted neighbors who asked how I was holding up. I said I was managing. That seemed to satisfy them. When I returned, Claire's car was in the driveway. So was another one. 2 women I didn't know were inside, standing in the bedroom with her. They spoke softly, discussing layouts and possibilities. One of them glanced at me and smiled politely, the way people do when they assume you're temporary. I stayed only a moment, long enough to understand. That afternoon, I retrieved the box from beneath the bed and carried it into the spare room. I locked the door behind me. I sat on the floor and opened it for the first time. Inside were papers my husband and I had set aside years ago. "Not for now," he had said, "for later." I unfolded them carefully, reading slowly, absorbing details I had once trusted him to remember for both of us. Downstairs, I could hear laughter, Claire's voice, my son's. I placed the papers back into the box and closed the lid. My hands were steady, my breathing even. That night at dinner, plans continued, dates were mentioned, decisions finalized. I listened without interruption. When the meal was over, I carried my plate to the sink and rinsed it clean. In my room, I sat on the edge of the bed and looked around one last time, not with sadness, but with clarity. They thought I was being moved. What they didn't realize was that I was preparing. On the 5th morning, I found a sticky note on the kitchen counter, Claire's handwriting, neat, confident, contractor coming Friday, please have the room mostly cleared. No greeting, no name. I folded the note once and placed it in my pocket. Then I made breakfast. The house followed its new rhythm. Claire left early, talking on her phone as she walked out the door. My son followed not long after, coffee in hand, keys already jingling before I could say a word. I watched them go from the front window, the same place I had stood countless mornings waving goodbye when my son was young. By late morning, the house was mine again, quiet, patient. I carried a laundry basket upstairs and paused outside the bedroom. The door was open, as it had been more often lately. Sunlight spilled across the floor, illuminating the outlines where furniture had sat for decades. The dresser, the bed, the chair by the window where my husband used to read the paper every Sunday. I set the basket down and sat on the edge of the bed. I remembered the day we moved into this house. I was 32. My husband had laughed when the realtor called it cozy. He said it was perfect, that we'd grow into it. And we had, slowly, carefully, room by room. That afternoon, I opened the closet and began to sort, not because I was told to, because I wanted to see what was truly mine. I laid sweaters across the bed, coats I hadn't worn in years, dresses saved for occasions that never came. Each item carried a memory, but not a demand. I folded them neatly and placed them back. Nothing left the room. Not yet. In the hallway, I heard the front door open. Claire came home earlier than usual. Her footsteps were brisk, purposeful. She stopped in the doorway and surveyed the room, eyes scanning corners, ceiling height, the bed itself. She noticed the folded clothes and nodded slightly, satisfied. "This will go quickly once we start," she said. "We're thinking light colours, open space." I met her gaze and smiled once, polite, neutral. She didn't linger. That evening, my son mentioned moving my things temporarily to the spare room. He said it gently, like someone offering a solution instead of delivering a decision. "It's just until everything's done," he said. I nodded again. I had learned when nods were safer than words. After dinner, I returned to the spare room and opened the box once more. I read every page this time, slowly, carefully, dates, signatures, language I had once skimmed without concern. My husband's handwriting appeared in the margins, small notes written to himself to me. I remembered him saying years ago, "Keep this somewhere safe." I remembered trusting that he had handled everything. I closed the box and placed it back under the bed. Not the spare bed, my bed. That night, I slept deeply for the first time since his passing. Not peacefully, but firmly, as if something inside me had settled into place. On Friday morning, the contractor arrived early. I heard his truck before I saw it. I stayed upstairs as Claire greeted him, her voice bright, rehearsed. They climbed the stairs together. When they reached the bedroom, I was already seated on the bed. My hands rested in my lap. The box was beside me, closed. The contractor hesitated. Claire paused. "Oh," she said, "we'll just need a moment." I didn't move. I didn't speak. They stepped back into the hallway. The door remained open. I sat there long after they left, listening to their voices fade downstairs. I ran my hand across the quilt my husband and I had chosen together, the one he liked because it reminded him of summers at his grandmother's house. They believed this room was a space to be reassigned. I knew better now. It was a boundary, and I wasn't finished drawing it. Saturday arrived with rain. Not heavy, just enough to keep the house dim and the air thick. Claire spent the morning on her phone, pacing the living room. I stayed upstairs, folding laundry that didn't need folding, listening to her voice rise and fall through the floorboards. She talked about delays, about schedules being tight, about needing cooperation. By noon, the rain stopped. The contractor's truck pulled into the driveway again, followed by a smaller car I didn't recognize. Claire straightened immediately, smoothing her sweater as if preparing for a meeting. I remained where I was. Footsteps climbed the stairs, the familiar pause outside the bedroom door. I could picture it without looking. Claire always hesitated there now, like she expected the room to move on its own. "This won't take long," she said, pushing the door open wider. The contractor stepped in, glancing around. His eyes moved from the walls to the bed, then to me. He nodded politely. The other man followed, holding a clipboard and a tablet. They spoke to each other in low voices, technical words floating past me. Load bearing, clearance, timeline. Claire stood near the door, arms crossed, watching their faces for approval. She looked satisfied when they nodded. "We'll need everything cleared before Monday," the man with the tablet said. "That'll make it easier." Claire turned to me then. "Can you manage that?" she asked. Her tone was neutral, reasonable, like she was asking about groceries. I looked at her for a moment, at the woman who had entered my life smiling, calling me mom, thanking me for helping with the wedding, the baby showers, the long weekends. "I'll take care of my things," I said. She smiled, relieved, as if that settled everything. After they left, I stayed seated, listening to the sound of their vehicles pulling away. My son hadn't come upstairs once. He remained downstairs, silent, present, absent. That afternoon, I packed one small bag, just essentials, a change of clothes, my medication, the photo of my husband and me taken on our 40th anniversary. I placed the bag in the spare room. I did not touch the bedroom furniture. At dinner, Claire spoke quickly, excited. She described how open the room would feel once everything was moved, how it would finally make sense. My son listened, nodding, offering small comments. They didn't ask where I would sleep Monday night. After dinner, my son found me in the kitchen. He stood awkwardly, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the floor. "You know this isn't personal," he said quietly. I rinsed my cup and set it on the drying rack. "I know," I replied. He waited, as if expecting more. An argument, a question. I gave him nothing. Later that night, when the house had gone quiet, I returned to the bedroom and knelt beside the bed. I reached beneath it and pulled out the box one last time. I opened it and removed a single envelope. Inside was a document my husband and I had signed years earlier. One we had discussed carefully, one he had insisted we keep private until necessary. I read it again, not to memorize it, but to remind myself that my memory was sound, that I had not imagined the conversations we'd had late at night, planning for a future we hoped would be gentle. I placed the envelope back in the box and slid it into the spare room closet behind the luggage we hadn't used in years. On Sunday morning, Claire began moving items from the bedroom without asking. A lamp, a chair, the small bookshelf by the window. She worked efficiently, humming softly to herself. I watched from the doorway. When she finished, she stepped back and surveyed her progress. "See," she said, "it's already better." I nodded once. That night I slept in the spare room. The bed was narrower, the ceiling lower. The house felt unfamiliar from that angle, like I had been relocated without leaving. As I lay awake, listening to the rain start again, I understood something clearly for the first time. They believed this was a transition. I knew it was a test. And I was done being measured. By Monday, the bedroom no longer felt like a room. It felt like a project. The bed was gone. The dresser followed. The chair by the window disappeared sometime in the afternoon, carried downstairs by two men who didn't know my name. I stayed in the spare room, door closed, listening to the hollow sounds travel through the house. When the noise stopped, I waited. That evening, Claire knocked once before entering the spare room. She stood just inside the doorway, careful not to step too far in, as if respecting a boundary she didn't fully recognise. "We'll need the mattress in here moved too," she said. "Just temporarily." I nodded. She hesitated, then added, "It's only for a little while." I didn't ask how long a little while was. The next few days passed quietly, too quietly. The house was filled with motion, but not conversation. Claire talked to vendors. My son worked longer hours. People came and went. I remained in the background, eating simple meals, folding my clothes, keeping to myself. No one asked if I needed help. On Thursday morning, I took a walk through the neighbourhood again. The leaves had begun to turn, early hints of red and gold clinging to the trees. I walked slower than before, letting the cool air fill my lungs. When I returned, I found the front door unlocked and voices inside. Claire and my son sat at the dining table with papers spread out between them, floor plans, timelines, budgets. They looked up when I entered. "We're almost there," Claire said. "Just a few more details to finalise." I smiled politely and continued into the kitchen. That afternoon, I called an old number I hadn't used in years. The man on the other end remembered my husband immediately. His voice softened when he spoke his name. "Yes," he said. "I remember the house." We spoke briefly. I asked questions. He answered them carefully. When we hung up, I felt no rush of emotion, just confirmation. That night, I sat on the spare bed and opened the box again. I removed the envelope and laid it flat on my lap. I didn't reread the entire document. I didn't need to. I knew where my name appeared. I knew what it meant. I placed the envelope inside my handbag and zipped it closed. The next morning, Claire announced that the bedroom renovation would begin the following week. She said it cheerfully over coffee, as if sharing good news. "You'll be more comfortable once everything's finished," she added. I thanked her. Later, as I passed the bedroom, I stopped. The space was stripped now. Bare walls. No traces left of the life that had filled it. The window stood open, letting in cold air. I closed it gently. I sat on the floor, cross-legged, and rested my hands on my knees. The room echoed slightly. Empty spaces always did. I thought about the years I had spent holding this family together, quietly, without keeping score. I thought about how easy it was for them to assume I would continue doing so, no matter how small my space became. That evening, my son finally spoke to me directly. "Are you okay?" he asked. I looked at him and nodded. "Yes," I said, "I am." It was true. Because I had stopped waiting for permission, because I had stopped hoping they would see me, because I had everything I needed, the room was no longer mine, but the house still was. And soon, they would understand the difference. By the following weekend, the house no longer pretended to include me. It functioned around me, like furniture pushed against a wall, still there, but no longer considered. Claire moved freely now, confident. She spoke about the renovation as if it were already complete. She discussed furniture deliveries and lighting choices while standing in rooms that had once held my life. My son followed her lead, carrying boxes, assembling shelves, avoiding eye contact. I adjusted. I woke earlier than everyone else. I used the kitchen before sunrise, cleaning up every trace of myself before they came downstairs. I ate smaller meals. I spoke less. I learned where to stand so I wouldn't be in the way. No one asked me to do these things. I simply understood the rules. One afternoon, I overheard Claire on the phone in the living room. I was in the hallway, unseen. "She's managing," she said. "It's not ideal, but it's temporary. She knows that." Temporary. I held on to that word as I walked back upstairs. In the spare room, I opened my dresser and found half the drawers empty. My clothes had been shifted again, not removed, just relocated, like a suggestion. That evening, I decided to go through old photo albums, not out of sentiment, but necessity. I needed to separate memory from attachment. I sat on the bed and turned the pages slowly. Birthdays, holidays, smiling faces gathered around tables I had set. I noticed how often I stood at the edge of the photos, holding a plate, adjusting a child's collar, always useful, rarely centered. When I reached the last album, I closed it and placed it back on the shelf. The next day, a delivery arrived. Large boxes stacked in the hallway, blocking the stairs. Claire clapped her hands together, excited. "This is it," she said. "Things are really moving now." I waited for someone to move the boxes. No one did. I stepped carefully around them, gripping the railing as I passed. Halfway up, I lost my balance for a moment. Not enough to fall, just enough to realise how easily I could have. Claire noticed. She laughed lightly. "Careful," she said. "These stairs are tricky." They had never been tricky before. That night, my son asked if I needed anything from the store. His tone was polite, distant. "No," I said, "I'm fine." And I was, because something had shifted. I no longer felt surprised by their behaviour. I no longer searched for explanations. I stopped wondering when kindness would return. That question had answered itself. Instead, I began to observe with clarity how Claire avoided discussing timelines in front of me, how my son deferred to her on every decision, how the word "we" never included me anymore. I started keeping a small notebook in my purse, nothing obvious, just dates, comments, decisions made without me, movements of furniture, conversations overheard, not to accuse, to remember. On Thursday evening, Claire announced that the spare room might also need adjustments. She said it casually, over dinner, while passing the salt. Just minor changes, she added. Nothing big. I met her eyes and smiled. "Of course," I said. Later, alone in the room that was shrinking by the day, I sat on the bed and rested my hands on my knees. I thought about all the times I had been flexible, all the times I had been patient. Flexibility, I realised, had been mistaken for permission. That night, I moved the handbag containing the envelope to a different place, somewhere they would never think to look, somewhere secure. I lay down and turned off the light. For the first time, I didn't feel displaced. I felt deliberate. They believed I was fading into the background. What they didn't know was that I was no longer trying to belong. I was waiting. And I had stopped waiting quietly. By the middle of the following week, the house had settled into its new order. The renovation schedule was taped to the refrigerator. Colour samples were spread across the dining table. The spare room door stayed closed more often now, as if privacy had been reassigned along with square footage. I moved through the days quietly. On Wednesday morning, I drove to the bank alone. I hadn't told anyone where I was going. I parked in the same spot my husband and I used to use, near the side entrance. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and disinfectant. The woman at the desk recognised my last name immediately. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said softly. I thanked her and handed over my ID. She reviewed the documents I brought with me, her expression careful, professional. She excused herself briefly, then returned with a folder and a man in a dark jacket. We spoke for less than 30 minutes. I asked direct questions. I received clear answers. Nothing dramatic happened, no raised voices, no surprises, just confirmation of things I already knew but needed to hear out loud. When I left, the sky was overcast. I sat in my car for a moment before starting the engine, hands steady on the wheel. At home, the driveway was full. Another delivery. More boxes. Claire was directing two men inside, pointing toward the bedroom with authority. She didn't notice me until I was already past her, carrying my purse upstairs. In the spare room, I sat on the bed and opened my notebook. I added the date, a few brief notes, then I closed it and placed it back in my purse. That afternoon, I called my sister. We hadn't spoken much since the funeral. I hadn't known what to say. "How are you really?" she asked. "I'm clear," I replied. She didn't press. The days after that passed without incident, too smooth. Claire seemed relieved. My son relaxed slightly, as if a difficult phase had passed. They spoke freely again, assuming I had accepted the situation. Acceptance was convenient for everyone. On Friday evening, I overheard my son talking on the phone. "Yeah," he said. "Once everything's finished, we'll have the space we need. It's better this way." Better. I stood at the top of the stairs, unseen, listening until the call ended. Then I turned and walked back into the spare room. That night, I took the envelope from my handbag and placed it on the desk. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I knew what it represented. Not power, not revenge, position. The next morning, I dressed carefully. Simple clothes, neutral colours. I ate breakfast alone and washed my dishes immediately. Old habits, useful habits. When Claire mentioned a family meeting later that week, I nodded. "Of course," I said. She smiled, satisfied. In the afternoon, I went through the house slowly, touching familiar surfaces. The banister, the window frames, the kitchen counter. Not in farewell. In recognition. This place still knew me. That evening, I sat in the spare room and packed a second small bag. Not to leave, to be ready. As I zipped it closed, I felt no fear, No urgency, only patience. They believed the situation was settled. They believed I had adjusted. They believed they had time. What they didn't know was that clarity changes things quietly. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't rush. It waits until everyone else is comfortable, and then it moves. By the end of that week, the house felt finished to everyone but me. The bedroom was nearly unrecognizable. New paint, bare floors waiting for furniture that hadn't arrived yet. The door stayed closed now, like something private had been established without consent. Claire was lighter, more relaxed. She spoke about plans again. Holidays, visitors, the future. My son joined in, his voice easier than it had been in weeks. They believed the tension had passed. I spent my time in the spare room, organising small things, sorting papers, discarding what no longer mattered, keeping what did. The envelope stayed with me now, always within reach, never visible. On Tuesday morning, I received a call from the same number I'd contacted earlier in the week. I answered quietly, stepping outside into the backyard. "Yes," I said. "That works." We spoke briefly. I asked one final question. The answer was clear. Sufficient. When I hung up, I stood beneath the maple tree my husband planted the year our son left for college. The leaves were beginning to fall, drifting down without urgency. I watched one land near my shoe and remain there. Inside, Claire was rearranging chairs in the dining room. She paused when she saw me enter. "We'll need to talk soon," she said, "just to make sure everyone's on the same page." I agreed. That evening, I cooked dinner without being asked. A simple meal. Familiar. My son noticed. "This reminds me of when I was a kid," he said, smiling briefly. I returned the smile and said nothing. After dinner, I washed the dishes and dried them carefully, placing each one back where it belonged. When I finished, I wiped the counter and turned off the light. I didn't linger. In the spare room, I laid out my clothes for the next day. Not special, just deliberate. I placed my handbag on the chair and checked that everything was inside. Sleep came easily that night. The next afternoon, Claire announced that a family meeting would happen the following evening. She said it cheerfully, as if it were a formality. My son nodded, already distracted by his phone. "Sounds good," I said. The day of the meeting arrived quietly. No tension, no warnings. I spent the morning reading in the living room, my husband's old book open on my lap. The house moved around me, phones rang, doors opened and closed, life continued. By late afternoon, I dressed and sat in the spare room, waiting, not rehearsing, not worrying, simply ready. When Claire called us into the dining room, I joined them without hesitation. She had arranged the chairs carefully. Documents were stacked neatly in front of her. My son sat beside her, attentive. She began speaking first. She talked about plans, about timelines, about what made sense going forward. She used words like efficiency and comfort. She avoided my eyes. I listened. When she finished, there was a pause, a polite one, expectant. I reached into my handbag and removed the envelope. I placed it gently on the table between us. "This belongs here," I said. My son looked at it, confused. Claire frowned slightly, her confidence faltering just enough. "What's that?" she asked. I rested my hands on the table. "It explains a few things," I replied. The room went quiet, not tense, just still. For the first time since my husband died, I felt fully present, not as a guest, not as an inconvenience, as the woman who still lived there. They believed the meeting was for closure. They didn't yet understand it was for clarity. And clarity, once placed on the table, doesn't move quietly. It waits to be read. The room stayed quiet after I placed the envelope on the table. Not awkward, not angry, just unfamiliar. Claire reached for it first, then stopped herself. My son watched her hand hover in the air before she pulled it back. Neither of them spoke. "It's nothing dramatic," I said calmly. "Just something your father and I prepared a long time ago." Claire's smile tightened. She glanced at my son, then back at the envelope, as if waiting for permission. He nodded. She opened it. I watched her eyes move across the page, slowly at first, then faster. Her posture changed. The confidence she'd carried into the room shifted almost imperceptibly, like weight moving off one foot and onto the other. "This can't be right," she said. "It is," I replied. My son leaned closer, reading over her shoulder, his brow furrowed. He looked up at me, genuinely confused now. "You never mentioned this," he said. "There was never a reason," I answered. Claire set the paper down carefully, as if it might stain the table. She straightened the stack of documents in front of her, no longer interested in them. This doesn't change the situation, she said after a moment. We're just talking about space. It changes where the space belongs, I said. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The silence stretched. I let it. My son cleared his throat. Mom, we thought. You assumed, I said, not unkindly. That's different. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain further. I didn't need to. The document spoke clearly enough. Claire crossed her arms. So what are you saying? I'm saying the house isn't being reassigned, I replied, and the room isn't available. Her expression hardened. We've already invested time and money into this. I know, I said. You didn't object before, my son added quietly. I was listening, I said. That's not the same as agreeing. Claire stood up from her chair and began pacing the room, stopping near the window, then the doorway, as if searching for support in the walls themselves. This puts us in a difficult position, she said. I'm aware, I replied. My son stayed seated. He stared at the table, jaw clenched. I could see the conflict forming, the realization that something had moved beneath his feet without warning. We need time to talk about this, he said. Of course, I said. Take all the time you need. Claire stopped pacing and looked directly at me. Her voice dropped. You could have said something earlier. I did, I replied. You just weren't listening. She looked away. The meeting ended shortly after. Not formally. It simply dissolved. Papers were gathered, chairs pushed back. Claire left the room first. My son followed slower. I remained seated. Later that night, I walked past the bedroom. The door was still closed. The paint smelled new. The floor was bare. I didn't go in. I went to the spare room instead and sat on the bed, removing the envelope from my handbag and placing it back where it belonged. I felt no satisfaction, no triumph, only steadiness. They had expected compliance. They had planned for silence. What they encountered instead was something they hadn't prepared for. Finality doesn't announce itself loudly. Sometimes it arrives folded neatly inside an envelope and waits to be read. And once it is, nothing continues the way it was. The days that followed were quieter than before. Not peaceful, just restrained. Claire stopped discussing plans out loud. The renovation stalled without announcement. The bedroom door stayed closed, but no one spoke about it anymore. My son moved carefully through the house like someone learning new boundaries without a map. No one apologized. They didn't need to. The shift was already complete. On Tuesday morning, I returned to my routine. Coffee at dawn. The kitchen window cracked open just enough to let in cool air. I sat at the table and read the paper from front to back, something I hadn't done in weeks. The house moved around me again, but differently now. More cautiously. Claire watched me from the hallway once, then looked away. That afternoon, my son knocked on the spare room door before entering. He hadn't done that before. I didn't know, he said, standing awkwardly near the doorframe. About any of it. I know, I replied. He waited as if expecting reassurance. I gave him none. I just thought things would be easier this way, he said. For who? I asked. He didn't answer. Later that evening, Claire suggested dinner out. Neutral territory. A reset. My son agreed quickly. I declined. I'll eat here, I said. They left without argument. I ate alone at the kitchen table, the same place I had sat for decades, watching others come and go. I cleaned up slowly, deliberately. No one rushed me. No one hovered. The next morning, the contractor called. Not Claire. Me? He sounded uncertain. Professional. He asked about next steps. There won't be any, I said. There was a pause. Understood, he replied. That afternoon, I unlocked the bedroom door and stepped inside. The space was bare, but it was quiet in a way it hadn't been since my husband passed. I opened the window fully and let the air move through the room. Dust motes drifted in the sunlight. I stood there for a long time, hands at my sides, feeling the room settle back into itself. That evening, Claire approached me in the living room. She spoke carefully now. We didn't mean to hurt you, she said. I know, I replied. She waited. But intent doesn't erase impact, I added. She nodded once. Tight, controlled. I suppose we need to rethink some things, she said. Yes, I replied. You do. She left the room. By the end of the week, the boxes in the hallway were gone. The dining table was cleared. The renovation schedule disappeared from the refrigerator. No announcements were made. No decisions revisited. They adjusted. So did I. I moved my belongings back into the bedroom gradually, one item at a time. Not to make a point, to reclaim a rhythm. My clothes returned to their drawers. The chair by the window came back upstairs. I placed my husband's reading glasses on the nightstand where they belonged. No one objected. On Sunday morning, I sat on the bed and made it properly for the first time since everything began. I smoothed the quilts and tucked in the corners. Simple actions, familiar ones. Downstairs, I heard my son making breakfast. Claire moved around quietly, avoiding the stairs. I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished. They had learned something important, not about documents or ownership or space, about limits, and so had I. Some lessons arrive late, some arrive after loss, but once learned, they do not need repeating. The house had not changed, the power dynamics had, and this time they settled where they belonged. The house settled slowly after that, like dust after a long day of movement. Mornings returned to their familiar shape, coffee brewed before sunrise, the paper folded neatly beside my plate. The bedroom door stayed open now, not as a statement, but as an ordinary fact. The room felt like a room again, not a decision waiting to be made. My son began speaking to me more. Small conversations, practical ones. He asked where things belonged. He waited for answers. Sometimes he stayed longer than necessary, as if unsure how to re-enter a space he had once stepped out of without noticing. Claire kept her distance, not out of hostility, out of adjustment. She moved carefully, like someone learning new rules without being told what they are. When she spoke to me, her tone was polite, measured. The way people speak when they understand a line exists, even if they don't fully understand why. No one mentioned the envelope again. It didn't need to be mentioned. One afternoon, I found my son in the backyard trimming the maple tree, the same one his father planted years ago. He paused when he saw me, resting his hands on his hips. "Dad loved this tree," he said. "He did," I replied. We stood there for a moment, watching leaves fall one by one. "I didn't realize how much you carried," he said quietly. "I didn't either," I answered. That was enough. As the weeks passed, the house found a new balance, not the old one, not the one they tried to impose, something quieter, clearer. I moved through my days without feeling watched or measured. I slept through the night. I laughed once or twice without effort. On a Sunday morning, I took out the photo of my husband and placed it on the dresser in the bedroom. I adjusted the frame until it caught the light just right, not to memorialize, to acknowledge. "I kept us safe," I said softly, not to him, but to myself. That afternoon, Claire packed away the last of the unused renovation supplies. The spare room emptied out again. The door stayed open. No announcements were made, no apologies demanded. The house did not need them. One evening, as I sat in the living room knitting, Claire paused nearby. "I didn't understand," she said carefully, "what it would feel like." I didn't respond right away. I didn't need to. "It feels like being erased," I said finally, and realizing it just in time. She nodded once. We left it there. Later that night, I walked through the house slowly, touching familiar things. The banister, the light switch by the stairs, the door frame where pencil marks still showed how tall my son had grown. I wasn't checking for changes. I was closing a circle. In the bedroom, I sat on the bed and looked around. The space felt full again, not of furniture, of presence, of permission reclaimed. I thought about the moment my daughter-in-law had measured the walls and spoken as if the room were already gone. I understood now that the room had never been the point. It was about who was expected to disappear quietly. That wouldn't be me. I turned off the light and lay down, listening to the house breathe around me. Not tense, not cautious, just alive. If there is one thing I've learned, it's this. Silence is not consent. Patience is not surrender. And kindness should never be mistaken for weakness. I didn't lose a room, I didn't lose a house, I lost an illusion. And in its place, I found something far more solid. Myself.